you can really tell there's almost no green. So what you can tell here is that humans and the environment are very much separated. Another thing that I see from this picture is the lack of permeable surfaces. This shows so much impermeable surfaces because these are all man-made surfaces, and this reminds me that every single time it floods in Philly, it doesn't even have to be that much water, but because of all the Hortonian overflow runoff, everything just piles together really, really quickly, leading to water issues. These are some water facts. Every single time I search up water issues, water insecurity, this is what I see. I see 700 million, I see 5 billion, I see 85%, I see 72%, I see half. These are all numbers. And at some point, I feel like numbers start to lose humanity. You start to get used to seeing numbers on a big screen. You start to think of it just as a number and not as who the people, the community is behind these numbers. This is another graph with more numbers, and this is how most water information is presented. And this is a very powerful way of presenting things, a visual way of presenting, but it loses a lot of what we're accomplishing as a water industry. So we learn a lot about what the water impacts are. What pollutants are we going for? Are we going for PCBs? Is it PFAS? Is it lead, mercury? We're learning about where these places are. Is it groundwater? Is it somewhere else? Is it from an aquifer? Is it aquifer drainage? We learn about why, but we don't really consider the real reason. It's always about numbers, and it's never about why and how. So why? Only recently have people considered why, which is the topic of environmental justice. Why are some communities more subject to environmental challenges? Why are some communities more vulnerable to environmental risk? Why are these frontline and marginalized communities more threatened? And we consider how. No people really consider how, which is why I started Waterroots. Waterroots is a global storytelling project that shows how different cultural perceptions are changing the way we interact with water. So this can mean a lot of things. I've heard about how religious perceptions have changed your influence to water, how cultural backgrounds, how your childhood experiences, how travel, all of these paint a water story. So I'm going to tell you a story of rain. And it's very fitting because the drive here today was not the best. But when I first came to Philly 3 years ago, I remember noticing that it rained a lot. And I would tell my friends, oh, it's raining so much. It's going to be a horrible week ahead. It's all going to be raining. And my two friends looked at me. They were really shocked. One was from Afghanistan, and one was from India. And they looked at me and they said, oh, actually, rain's a beautiful thing. And in a place where there's a dry season and a rainy season, where rain brings prosperity, where rain brings life, especially my friend in Afghanistan told me that sometimes it was so dry that they could feel the dryness of their nose. Just the thought of rain or the sight of rain was a cause for celebration. And that really started this perception to me because my entire world was shifted. Because of where I grew up, because of the experiences I've had, I approached water in a completely different way. And this shows that when we're developing these scientific systems, when we're working with all these people on a global scale, what does it mean to truly accompany what they need? Last year, I don't know if you guys can remember, there was a water spill. There was a chemical spill in the water. And for me, I realized how little people here in the US perceive water pollution or water insecurity. I remember walking into Acme and seeing that all of the water bottles were completely bottled. And that was completely new to me because it brought me back to the start of the pandemic, where everything was completely in chaos. And even though the place in Philadelphia I was at was not impacted at all by this water spill, or like this chemical spill in the water, people had no experience with losing access to water. They had no idea what it was like to be in a position where this critical resource is not readily available. And I think that was a very powerful experience because even in highly educated settings, a lot of people don't consider what natural resources mean and what it means to lose a natural resource. I work with a lot of environmentalists and climate advocates. And they always tell me that global warming is a horrible thing, and I completely agree. But they always always focus on the numbers. They focus on the 1.5 degrees Celsius, the 2 degrees Celsius, the significant loss in biodiversity. And these are all pressing issues. But if you think about the people on the ground who don't have access to water for a day or two, and think about what that means. So here's my water story. My family is from Taiwan, and Taiwan is a place where typhoons are readily occurring. And my family is from a very rural part called Ilan. And there was this one year, a typhoon hit, and when I woke up, all the trees were gone. They were completely knocked over, and I opened the tap, and a yellow stream of minerals came out, and there was no water. I started traveling and doing environmental work, conducting surveys, giving speeches throughout the world. In Arenal, Costa Rica, versus Sun Lake City, Taiwan. In Costa Rica, this is one of the largest lakes, and it's completely artificial. Some engineers added fresh water and completely built this entire ecosystem. And on the right is something C. This is a region of Taiwan that is historically a travel destination. But just seeing how these different perceptions, how different people reacted, how people adapted to these water conditions was really stunning. Continuing this trend of island nations, New Zealand. This is PA-AWWA, and this is Hanya in Greece. So in PA-AWWA, one of the largest challenges they have is eutrophication due to nitrates and phosphates. And I could talk about this a lot more, but since I come from an extensive STEM background, but we're talking about how these people are perceiving the water. 95% of their local rivers have some sort of eutrophication pollution. But in my conversations with locals there, especially the Maori people, they told me that water has never been an issue, and they don't think that water ever will be. In Greece, despite being surrounded by water, they have flooding issues, and now most of their processes are working for desalination. So I started building up this organization to document different water stories. Right now we're working with 23 different countries to document how people are approaching climate change. And whether this is perspectives of social dimensions or political dimensions or even economic dimensions, there's so many aspects to the water world that have to be considered. So what is the power of a water story? I started out with Waterroots in education. And from a STEM background, this was a huge transition for me. So Waterroots actually started out as a PFAS filtration project, which is very separate from the work we're doing right now. But after I was building my first prototype with the help of the Philadelphia Water Department and Drexel and Penn, conversations with locals showed me that one scientific solution wouldn't be enough. There has to be a group of people who are teaching and understanding how local groups are reacting to water stress, which is why I think the work in Temple is so important, because it's recognizing that these local conditions are present. So this is me in my first year giving presentations in Taiwan to elementary school students, and this was the easiest presentation ever. I gave them presentations on how water stress works, on different water conditions, especially in Taiwan, where all of their water is in a single reservoir, especially in the main cities. So in the case of pollution, it'd be a drastic event, and when there's overflooding from typhoons. From this filtration project and realizing that there are a lot of water issues, water encompasses a lot of different challenges, as I'm sure you all know, with all the regulations, political, social, economic, cultural dimensions all should be considered. And that's what we're doing here at Waterroots. So water stories are really, really powerful because they have the ability to engage with people, to humanize these numbers that we're seeing. I'm going to share 4 powerful water stories that I've heard, but there are countless that I could continue sharing. In the top left, this is a picture from Tanzania. And our partners there were telling us about how, because historical mining has occurred in that place, now they have a lot of acid mine drainage, which is leading to water pollution in the area. And how local people are responding to that changes based on your position, your socioeconomic status. On the right, this is from Karachi in Pakistan. And in this region of the world, they have a really tight control over water because of the water mafia that controls the access and sell of water. So our partners there have to buy water once a week. They buy these big gallons or barrels of water, and that has to last them for an entire week. In this case, this isn't a small leather bag. People are even resorting to smuggling water because it is a resource that they can't access available. In the left, this is our partner. This is representative of the Ganga River in India, where upstream, the water, this is a holy river to them. And despite all of the challenges, there's a lot of pollution. It's one of the most polluted rivers in the world. And a lot of these challenges stem from, even though, because they're addressing this as a religious body of water, they're neglecting a lot of sanitation systems that should be in place. And on the right is from our partner in Peru. And she comes from an agricultural community, and she told me about how the last 2 years, because of local conditions where there was global warming leading to less water, they had droughts, which led to food insecurity issues too. So as you can see, water encompasses so many different challenges, and it's so much easier to relate, to engage to a single story. And I do recognize that we're working with all these countries, but we're only isolating small subsections. We're only working with youth because we believe youth have the ability to see special things about the climate. There's this term second environment, second generation. So we're born into this environment that we perceive as our first exposure to the world. And we have to deal with all the water challenges that we see today. We started launching special projects in some of our special nations where we see issues that we can control as Waterroots partners. So in Nigeria, we found a link between period poverty and water insecurity, with period poverty being the access to menstrual products. And we're working to combat with local groups, with medical students, to assess and to help gain access to both water and menstrual products through engagement efforts. In Cameroon, we're working with Revive Action, a local nonprofit, to work on plastic pollution. And in there, they have a large challenge in terms of upstream, downstream perceptions. So upstream communities in this place, in the Ndongo River, they have this out of sight, out of mind approach. So they pollute into the river, and because it's gone, they don't think about it anymore. And downstream, these communities are facing huge microplastic impacts. So we're working on both a cleanup and an education movement in Cameroon. We're working with local teachers in Kenya to reform climate education standards. And I actually had a chance to speak with the Chief Sustainability Officer here and a lot of local teachers in Philadelphia to hear about how climate education is a really important thing. So we're gonna work together to bring climate education and increase climate literacy throughout Kenya. And lastly, this is one of the most interesting projects I've seen. But hair loss has been associated with climate change in Bangladesh, especially in rural areas. So with these diminishing water resources, drinking water is the number one priority, and personal hygiene becomes a second priority. And in this case, because the water is more saline, or there's the presence of certain pollutants, like heavy metals, it's causing hair loss, significant hair loss in these communities, where now women are even selling their hair for money. The real reason this is a challenge is this is a socioeconomic status, and now it's on physical display. Now people who have access to filtered water aren't losing their hair, and people with these challenges have it physically shown. So we're working to investigate this, to bring more attention to this issue, and we're working with local partners in both Afghanistan and here in Bangladesh. Locally, I feel like Waterroots has been working well internationally, and we need to work on local perspectives too. So next year, we're working on an upcoming project to document Native perspectives from Native Americans and to showcase how their interactions with water have changed over the course of the last hundreds of years. And I think this is a really important story because a lot of us don't really consider how our water systems have evolved. We consider like, oh, we need to change out a pipe. We need to revitalize the system, but there's a lot of perspectives that need to be considered too, and we're trying to showcase these values. So, key messages. Cultural background influences a lot of water perceptions. The way you grew up, the things you've seen, they all influence a lot about water insecurity. If I had never seen a typhoon as a child, I don't think I'd know what water insecurity was. If A lot of my friends didn't go through a period of the chemical water spill last year. They wouldn't even have considered that water is a losable resource. Environmental education is the first step to climate resilience. I feel like this is a given, but people don't really consider it. You can't really act on things you are unaware about or you don't know about. So having a proper education system, whether this is through climate literacy, whether this is the standardization of climate projects, that's the first step towards climate resilience. And youth can make meaningful impacts. I feel like a lot of people are waiting because they think they're future leaders, but just because you're young does not mean you're a future leader. And this doesn't apply. I feel like anyone can lead at any stage that they want to. And meaningful impacts always start from a small group of people. So here's my executive team in Philadelphia. I want to give a special shout out to them for all the wonderful work they've done. We're working with a lot of volunteers at this point, so it is a larger time commitment. And with the nonprofit work, I've learned a lot about what it means to have resilience and patience, especially since this is all volunteer-based work, so it does get a little bit slower. Special thank you to all of our mentors and sponsors. Thank you so much.